She smiled as she cried, and you lost the war. It wasn't the scream that undid you. It was the silence that followed that perfect, strategic pause. The way she left the door half open so your pride could limp after her. The mascara wasn't smeared, but placed like ritual paint, the theatre of a woman preparing to gut an emperor without ever lifting a blade. You thought it was chaos. It was calculation. You mistook her shaking voice for weakness. You didn't notice her studying your breath. When you shouted, she measured your volume like a general mapping artillery. When you begged, she wrote your weakness into her next move. You didn't lose her. You were studied, dissected, unmasked. And while you tried to love, she played to win. That unease crawling through your gut now, it isn't heartbreak. It's strategy recognizing strategy. You've been outmaneuvered by something you never trained for, a battlefield veiled in emotion, ruled by impulse, but executed with surgical timing. If this whisper already knows, you let it echo. Like the video. Leave your shadow in the comments. Subscribe and stay near the silence. Her vulnerability is not a plea, it's surveillance. Every visible crack in her emotion is an invisible blade. You mistook her trembling lip for sincerity, didn't you? You thought the dampness in her eyes was softness, not the glint of a blade being sharpened in real time. You heard her voice crack and felt pity swell in your chest. And in that precise moment, she counted your pulses, noted the hitch in your breath, and logged the shape of your reflex. The game began not when she wept, but when you leaned in. That lean, that fatal lean, was the sign she was waiting for, not of safety, of access. She knows the art of the pause better than a diplomat, better than a priest at confession, better than you. You believed she had dropped her defenses, but what she had dropped was a lure, coiled in lace. You didn't see the calculation beneath the flutter of lashes, the cold discipline that trained the exact drop speed of a single tear down her cheek. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to imply that you were the only one who could stop it. And you did try, didn't you? You offered words like olive branches, but this wasn't peace, this was reconnaissance. Every word you gave her, every explanation, apology, confession was written into her unspoken ledger. You thought love was transparency. She knew that transparency was leverage. While you spoke, she learned. While you softened, she sketched the boundaries of your ego, traced the pulse points of your pride. Her sorrow was not weakness, it was camouflage. She is not evil, that would be too easy. She is nature, and nature does not need a reason to be strategic. The gazelle learns the pattern of the lion's chase not because it hates, but because it survives. You, in your foolish chivalry, mistook her for a poem, but she is a mirror with teeth. She shows you what you worship, not what you see. Do you remember the first time she cried in front of you? How small her voice became, how it activated something in you, something ancient. Nightly, desperate to rescue, you weren't falling in love. You were being conditioned to react, to prioritize her emotional world as sovereign, even when it contradicted itself. You didn't ask why the tears always came when you pulled away, when you grew distant, when you paused. You didn't notice that they followed your strength, not your cruelty, because they weren't sadness. They were radar. She studies your reactions like a tactician studies enemy troop movement. When you try to soothe her, she sees the angles of your guilt. When you grow quiet, she watches for cracks in your detachment. Each tear is not a plea, it's a probe. She is not melting, she is mapping. And once mapped, you are maneuvered. She knows how to make her pain echo in your bones. You hear it in the silence after her retreat. You feel it when she doesn't text, doesn't call, doesn't ask. She does not chase, because she does not need to. Her tears have already planted seeds in your mind, little traps of memory, guilt, image. You begin to imagine her weeping. You begin to imagine being the cause of it. She has weaponized your imagination, and she did it without raising her voice. What you think is empathy is often submission. You begin to apologize before you know what you've done. You become hesitant with truth, careful with tone, cautious with silence. And each time you avoid honesty for the sake of harmony, she learns the edges of your fear. You stop leading, you start managing, and she knows it. She knows when your spine turns into velvet. She knows when your eyes stop meeting hers in truth. She knows when your voice starts weaving fictions of kindness to preserve the illusion that you are in control. But you're not. She is. She doesn't need to scream. She doesn't need to rage. She doesn't even need to explain. She only needs to suggest that she is wounded, and you will unravel to avoid being the cause. And once that threat is internalized, you become your own jailer. You will betray your instincts just to keep her from crying again. But the tears will still come, not because you failed, but because you flinched. She doesn't need to break you. She only needs to train you. You see, power is not in force. Power is in the calibration of response. If she can provoke you into reacting, into changing your tone, questioning your truth, revising your strength, then she rules you. She doesn't need a crown. She needs your instinct to kneel, and that instinct is forged, drop by drop, through the alchemy of emotion and guilt. You believe she cried because she trusted you, but no, she cried because she tested you, and you passed by failing. You believed her pain was a door you could walk through and save her, but her pain was the door that closed behind you as you entered. Disarmed, she remembers what you revealed during those moments, your childhood stories, your shame, your confusion. She knows that the man who bends to soothe a weeping woman is the same man who will bend again when blamed. The tear was only the beginning. The trial came later, when she'd accuse you of not doing enough, of being cold, of not being the man she cried for, and you would try again, softer, gentler, smaller. She doesn't destroy your masculinity. She exposes how weakly it was built. You believed that emotion equals honesty, but she understands that emotion is a language, and like any language, it can be mastered, manipulated, staged. If she controls the emotional tempo of the room, she controls the logic. If her tears win the rhythm, your arguments are drowned in their flood. And soon, you no longer speak truth, you negotiate against her sorrow. That is not love, that is conquest. And she weeps, not to lose, but to win with mercy. If you doubt this, ask yourself why her tears never fall in front of those she respects, only in front of those she wants to bend. Ask why the woman who can dominate a boardroom, command attention, and crush silence with a glance becomes suddenly fragile when you say no. Ask why the emotions always arrive as soon as your boundaries do. She is not playing a childish game, she is playing the oldest one. This is not cruelty, this is power, and it is not hers alone. It belongs to nature, to the serpent, to the mother, to the theater of vulnerability that turns kings into caretakers, warriors into confessors, lovers into loyal prisoners of emotion. You thought strength was in holding her, but your strength was supposed to be in holding yourself even as she fell apart in front of you, because she didn't need rescue. She needed a rival. She didn't need comfort. She needed containment. She needed to meet something that would not bend so she could believe in it. But you bent, and you believed her tears were truth. You failed the test, and now you no longer speak like a man, you whisper like a subordinate. She doesn't have to ask where your strength went. She remembers the exact moment she took it. She didn't wipe her tears that day. She filed them away. They weren't for her. They were for you. Withdrawal is not retreat, it's bait. Distance is the arena where your masculinity is tried without armor. You thought it was over when she left the room. You thought silence meant escape. But the echo was the real message, the soft click of the door not fully shut, half open like a trap, inviting pursuit, requiring it. That was no exit. That was a test, a psychological snare, a battlefield moved from speech into silence. She didn't slam the door, she left it ajar, and you, poor strategist, read it as mercy instead of challenge. The real war starts when she's no longer speaking. The stillness begins to itch. You pace, you scroll, you replay the words, the sighs, the look on her face. You interpret, reinterpret, create narratives where there were only feints. She doesn't need to scream because your mind will fill in the violence on its own. You will become your own interrogator, and she knows that. She has learned that withdrawal starves you. That silence is not absence, it is control. You once believed a man's strength lay in action, in confrontation, in verbal clarity, but she knows that emotional warfare does not reward directness. It rewards reaction. She withdraws, and you begin to bleed from within, because you were not trained for ambiguity, not bred to survive uncertainty. You need closure. She feeds on your need. She doesn't block your number. She leaves the last message unread. She doesn't slam the door. She leaves behind her scent. She doesn't declare an ending. She creates suspense. And in that tension, she watches. The pause between her absence and your response is where your worth is measured, not in her eyes, but in your own unraveling. She doesn't even need to witness it. She trusts your desperation to document itself. You will reach out. You will beg. You will explain again what you've already explained. You will apologize for things unnamed. And all of it, every sentence, will affirm that she is the center of your composure. She knows. The one who can make you explain yourself twice. Already owns you. This is not affection withheld. It is oxygen withheld. She's watching how long you can survive without validation, without resolution, without emotional certainty. The half-closed door is her lab. You are the rat. The cheese is her affection. The maze is made of silence. Do you see it now? Every minute you spend wondering what you did wrong is a minute she doesn't have to lift a finger. You turn against yourself, hoping that self-flagellation will summon her voice again. But it doesn't. It only reinforces her position. She becomes the judge, you, the defendant. And yet there has been no accusation. That is the genius of her withdrawal. It doesn't convict. It suggests. And in that suggestion, you condemn yourself. And here's the deeper cut. The longer she says nothing, the more you talk. You unearth old memories, theorize her intentions, even question your sanity. She is quiet, and you become verbose, eager to fill the void. But every word is a leak in your armor. She has learned how to reverse the power dynamic without lifting a hand. She walks away, and you collapse into her absence like a guilty man walking into a noose he tied himself. You confuse your need to be heard with love, but she knows it's fear. You call her distance manipulation, but she calls it measurement. She wants to see what remains of your structure when she removes her softness, when the smiles stop, when the warmth fades, when there is no reply. She's not being cruel. She's being precise. You wonder if she's thinking of you, if she's hurting too, but that's not the question. The real question is, what is she building in your absence? What version of you is she assembling in the theater of her silence? And will you be allowed back in, or have you already been replaced, not by another man, but by a memory of you that obeyed more. Because silence is not a void, it is a sculptor. It reshapes your image in her mind. It gives her room to fantasize, to judge, to mythologize, to subtract. And if she returns, it will not be to you, but to the version of you she found more useful, the less difficult you, the more obedient you, the one who didn't argue when she wept, the one who didn't raise his voice when provoked, the one who chased. That is the audition you are failing right now. While you wait, you think your stoicism will win her back, but she's not watching for stone. She's watching for cracks. Your stillness is only admirable if she believes it cannot be broken. But once she senses performance, once she smells the effort behind your detachment, she no longer sees strength. She sees theater, and no woman rewards pretense for long. The door is still open. You think this is hope? But open doors are traps when placed by someone who knows you'll crawl through them on your knees. And when you do, when you call, when you show up, when you ask, "What did I do?" you confirm the structure she suspected, that you are not sovereign, that you are not unmoved, that your love is not rooted in principle, but in need, and need to her is not endearing. It is exploitable. You don't understand yet that masculinity is not proven in what you do when she weeps, but in what you don't do when she disappears. Can you remain whole? Can you hold your position? Can you endure the echo, because that is the furnace in which a woman forges her true respect? Not in candlelight, not in compliments, but in absence. She wants to see if your spine remembers how to stand when her smile isn't there to lean on. You call it coldness. She calls it clarity. You call it ghosting. She calls it observation. You call it confusing. She calls it revelation. If you panic when she pulls away, she has no reason to trust you when she returns, because what you show her in your desperation is that your love depends on her nearness. And love, to her, is only real when it survives distance. Do you understand? She leaves the door half open to see if you'll walk out or beg to be let in again. And every time you linger in the hallway, trying to decipher her silence, you fail the trial. Because the man who waits for permission to speak, to lead, to stand, is no man at all. This is not about power over her. This is about not surrendering yours. She doesn't need to be chased. She needs to see that you don't flinch, that when she withdraws, you stay composed. You don't explain. You don't beg. You don't send 12 messages at midnight. You let the door swing, because only then does she wonder if you have disappeared, too. And that wondering, not your apology, is what restores balance. But you rarely let it reach that far. You can't sit in the silence. You rush. You fill the void. You perform. And she watches. Not your words, your erosion. She sees that you were never centered. You were simply propped up by her emotional availability. And the moment she took that away, you fell. She will return. Maybe. But not for you. For the memory of who you could have been, if you had only held your line. The more you explain, the less you reign. She tests for dominance by provoking confession and punishes clarity with contempt. It begins with a question she already knows the answer to. But it's not truth she's after. It's hierarchy. It's position. She asks softly, almost too softly, "Why did you say that, or do you even care?" But beneath that velvet voice lies a scalpel. You think the answer will repair the breach. You think words will stitch the tension. So you answer, you explain, you unravel the logic behind your choices. You offer motives, context, apologies, even childhood wounds to justify the moment. But the more you speak, the less she hears. Not because she isn't listening, but because she's ranking you. And every sentence is a demotion. She doesn't punish dishonesty. She punishes weakness. And in the court of emotional power, Explanation is weakness, she asks, not to be enlightened, but to see if you will kneel to the doubt she plants, if you will justify yourself like a subject before a queen, if you will prioritize her perception over your own certainty. You thought your honesty would bring closeness, but she watches for the crack in your voice, the nervous laugh, the way your eyes flick away when her silence tightens. She watches not for truth, but for submission. The moment you start explaining yourself, the crown begins to slide, and she feels it. You thought she wanted connection, but no, she wanted confirmation. Confirmation that you fear her disapproval more than you value your sovereignty, that you are willing to trade self-assurance for the chance to be understood. And once she sees that trade, she cannot unsee it. You fall from man to boy pleading for comprehension instead of standing in your choice. You say, I didn't mean it that way. She hears, I need your permission to exist. You say, it wasn't about you. She hears, please don't punish me. You say, let me explain. She hears, you're in control. And you know it. You feel it. The more you try to make her see your side, the less she looks at you with admiration. You try to be clearer, softer, more emotionally available. But she no longer wants clarity. She wants contrast. She wants a man who doesn't need to be understood to remain himself. A man who stands firm, not for war, but for truth even when it makes her weep. But you, fearing her sorrow more than your own erosion, betray yourself. She asked you, why didn't you tell me? And instead of replying with spine, you dissolved into pages of guilt. You gave her the keys. You said, in every gesture, you may define me now. And she did, not with words, with silence, with distance, with the subtle withdrawal of desire. You became safe, and safety is not what she craves. She wanted to feel the heat of a man who doesn't tremble at her feelings, who listens but does not wobble, who witnesses her storms without bending his throne to her tides. But you abdicated. You offered her your crown, forged from your own integrity, just to earn back a smile. And the tragedy, she didn't even want it. She doesn't want to rule you. She wants to test the throne to feel that it cannot be moved. That when she's crying, you do not kneel. That when she's furious, you do not shrink. That when she accuses you of not loving her enough, you look back without flinching and say, I do not prove myself through performance. But you performed anyway. You narrated your soul. You translated every shadow. You exposed every scar. You thought vulnerability would redeem you. But in her world, redemption only belongs to those who never asked for it. Now she touches you with less fire. Now her words lose their glow. She kisses you, but with half-closed eyes. You feel it, the shift. You've become familiar, predictable, compliant. She still sleeps beside you, but somewhere inside, she's walking away. Not because you were cruel, but because you collapsed. You replace strength with access, and she cannot respect what she can command. And when you notice this distance, what did you do? You tried harder, you loved louder, you chased softer, you wrote longer messages, made more promises, bled for a second chance at her mystery. But mystery cannot be chased. It must be opposed. She is not magnetized by your empathy, she is ignited by your untouchability. But you've erased every edge. Now you respond immediately. Now you answer every question before it's fully asked. Now you flinch before you're even hit. She doesn't have to test you anymore, you live in test mode. You monitor her emotions like a guard at a prison of your own design, and she feels it. The emotional servitude disguised as love. The emotional obedience you call maturity. She feels it, and it kills the last breath of her feminine chaos. She wanted a mirror that refused to reflect her until she was ready to see herself. You became a puddle. She will say nothing, but she will begin to look elsewhere, not for another man, but for that feeling she once had in your presence, the unknown, the untamed, the structure she couldn't reshape. You've made yourself soft. She needed form. She'll still ask you questions, but not because she wants answers, because she's measuring how much you've left of yourself. And if the answer is very little, she won't yell, she won't argue, she won't explain her exit. She will simply become silent in a way that doesn't invite pursuit. A silence you finally know not to touch. A silence that echoes not with the threat of loss, but with the confirmation of it. And when she walks away, when the tears dry, when the memories dim, you will look back and wonder, where did I lose her? It wasn't in a fight. It wasn't in a mistake. It was in that moment you tried to explain yourself instead of holding your ground. You thought confession would restore the bond, but confession is not strength when begged for. It's only power when chosen. And you didn't choose. You obeyed. You surrendered your mystery, your edge, your asymmetry. You turned your masculinity into a checklist, and she, with surgical precision, checked every box until there was nothing left to desire. That is the crown of the shamed man. A crown not taken, but handed over in the name of love, of fairness, of closeness. But love doesn't live in explanation. It lives in contradiction, in the friction between worlds, in the tension between fire and control. And you tried to extinguish the fire by becoming understandable. Now you wear the crown she never asked for, and she has already forgotten your name. Somewhere, a throne sits untouched, dust on its arms, silence in its seat. A single black ribbon is tied to its crown, loose, like regret. The room is empty, the woman is gone. But her question still hangs in the air, unanswered. Why did you give it all away? No voice responds, only the echo of your own clarity, too late to be respected. The door is still half open, but no one is waiting on the other side.